Okay, Moray Rabotai, Bezrat Hashem Mincha is going to be 7:05, the city hot, 6:25. The learning today is Refuah Shlema Tzvi Pinchas HaKohen ben Rabbak, a successful procedure and a fast recovery, sponsored by Kirat Avodat Hashem, as well as Refuah Shlema to Miriam Bat Shini, sponsored by the Izikov family. The halakha we were discussing yesterday, which is according to Chacham Ovadia, major cities that have a Eruv known as the Tzurat HaPetach, where you have a string which encloses the surrounding area, that is a valid Eruv. And in the case of a need, Ovadia writes Bishat Dahak or Makom Tzorech, cases of need, one would be permitted to carry in, and if those Eruv are functioning and are up. Of course, you have to check in periodically to make sure that the Eruv is good, because in some communities the Eruv gets knocked down very easily and they have a lot of construction, and it could be that the Eruv might be down on Shabbat, but if the Eruv is functioning, Avadi says you could carry in a case of a need or in a case of dahak. Now, in truth, there's such a thing as a very high standard Eruv. There's such a thing as an upgraded Eruv, where you could even carry lechatchila. So I want to make this point about the Hillcrest and Kew Garden Hills. Everything that is essentially between the LIE, the Van Wyck, and the Grand Central, because those highways employ fences or physical barriers like mountainous sloped mountains, which also are considered to be walls in halakha. So that whole area that we're really inside, Hillcrest and Fresh Meadows is inside, is enclosed on three sides by fences. The strings just fills in the gaps, the exits and the openings and the streets that cross through. That's why you put up strings. But since the majority is fencing and is mechitzot, so therefore it's deemed from the Torah as a reshut hayahid, which means the standards and the requirements are very much lessened, and the severity is brought down a whole notch according to the vast majority of Rishonim and the Aharonim. Therefore, the Eruv is a pretty high standard Eruv. If it's functional, it is high standard because by the very definition of how it's surrounded. Interesting fun fact, the Forest Hills Eruv, maybe 10, 15 years ago, was not on that high standard, but it was upgraded. About 10 years ago, it was upgraded so that it should include and be encompassed by mostly walls, and therefore it was considered to be, again, in that same status as a high status Eruv. And anybody who's building a Eruv in a new city should really look for highways, freeways, and try to construct the Eruv around those, because A, it makes it much more superior, and B, it's easier to maintain when it's fences versus when it's strings and a truck could come in and a crane could come in and knock down your strings, and you have to go ahead and redo it. So it's a very simple and practical solution. The only thing is sometimes very big, and checking the Eruv might prove to be difficult. But generally, that's a very high standard Eruv. And the truth of the matter is, even according to Maran Shulchan Aruch, in a Eruv that is Omed Merubeh ala Parutz, that three sides are enclosed inherently before you even start with the strings, they're mainly enclosed. Those kinds of Eruvim are lechatchila. Even Rav Ovadia would agree that you're able to carry lechatchila and not just b'makom tzorich, which is why I generally tell people that live in Hillcrest, that live in Forest Hills, that they're permitted to carry. They don't have to be mahmir. If they want to be stringent and it doesn't come out on other people's expense, they're allowed to be stringent. Of course, the mahmir tavo le'be'acha, they should be blessed. But in halakha, it is permitted to carry in these types of eruvs that are very, very upgraded, even lechatchila. And Rav Ovadia wrote, just to remind everybody, even if it just was a string enclosing a city, they would have on what to rely, and in a case of a need, and in a case of dahak, it would be permitted according to Rav Ovadia, and some eruvim are under that capacity, but eruv like ours is much more lechatchila and is permitted to carry. Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen ve'amen.